Over the decades, Queen Elizabeth II attended nearly every royal wedding of the modern era, and almost always arrived wearing a carefully chosen brooch. At first glance, these jewels might seem like simple accessories, but look a little closer, and a fascinating pattern begins to emerge. Certain brooches appear again and again, sometimes decades apart, sometimes at the most emotional moments in the royal family's story. And once you notice this pattern, it becomes hard to believe these choices were accidental. Today, we are going to look at the brooches the Queen wore to royal weddings, and the quiet messages they may have carried. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. When we look at the royal vaults, some jewels carry the weight of state history, while others are deeply, wonderfully personal. The brooch Queen Elizabeth II chose for some of the most significant family weddings belongs to the latter category. It is a piece so rare and so closely tied to her own romantic history that its appearance never felt like a mere coincidence. I am talking about the magnificent Williamson pink diamond brooch. The story of this jewel begins in 1947 in a rather unexpected way. Children playing under a tree just outside a mine in Tanzania stumbled upon an unusual stone. It was a rough pink diamond weighing a staggering 54.5 carats. The mine's owner, a Canadian geologist and royalist named Dr. John Thorburn Williamson, decided to present this uncut marvel to Princess Elizabeth as a wedding gift. The meticulous cutting process transformed it into a flawless 23.6-carat gem. By her coronation year in 1953, Elizabeth turned to Cartier, where it was beautifully set into a platinum brooch in the shape of a jonquil flower, surrounded by over 200 white diamonds. With that masterpiece completed, the Queen began to weave it into her family's most joyous moments. Let us step into June 1961 to the marriage of her first cousin, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Catherine Worsley. This was a grand occasion, taking place at York Minster, the first royal wedding held there since King Edward III married Philippa of Hainault in 1328. Prince Edward and the Queen shared a very close bond. He was one of the most devoted members of the family and one of the first to swear allegiance to her at her 1953 coronation. The Queen officially approved the match without hesitation, as required by the Royal Marriages Act, though the groom's mother, Princess Marina, initially dragged her feet over her son marrying a commoner before finally warming to Catherine. Arriving last at the minster alongside Prince Philip, as protocol dictates, the Queen wore a 4-strand pearl necklace and a hat adorned with a white flower. This was a remarkably subtle and thoughtful nod to the bride, who hailed from Yorkshire and had been affectionately dubbed the White Rose of York by the press. But the centerpiece of her ensemble was the Williamson pink diamond brooch. Choosing the very diamond she received as a wedding gift for her cousin's marriage feels like a profoundly supportive gesture. Looking back, it warms my heart to know that the pink diamond's blessing worked here. Edward and Catherine went on to share a remarkably long and enduring marriage lasting over 6 decades, exactly the kind of lifelong partnership the Queen would have wished for them. Leaving the historic arches of York behind, our story moves forward 20 years to a very different kind of royal spectacle. July 1981, the wedding of her eldest son and heir, Prince Charles, to Lady Diana Spencer at St. Paul's Cathedral. At the time, Diana seemed like the absolute perfect choice for the future king. It was dubbed the wedding of the century, and it truly looked like a flawless fairy tale unfolding before our eyes. The Queen chose an ensemble designed by Ian Thomas, featuring a pale blue, turquoise chiffon and silk crepe dress with a pleated coat, paired with a matching turban-style hat decorated with silk chiffon flowers. To complement the Williamson pink diamond brooch on this monumental day, she reached for one of her grandest daytime jewels, the Hanoverian pearls. This incredible antique double strand carries an astonishing history, passing from Catherine de' Medici to Mary, Queen of Scots, and eventually down to Queen Victoria. Her husband, Prince Albert, famously considered them the finest pearls in all of Europe. When I watch the footage of that day now, knowing all the heartbreak that followed, I always experience such conflicting feelings. It is genuinely painful to see the contrast between the glittering fairy tale of that morning and the tragedy we now know was waiting in the wings. But if you look closely at the Queen in those moments, she is absolutely beaming. She looks ecstatic, thrilled, and utterly happy, very much like a normal mother rejoicing at her son's wedding. By wearing this specific pink diamond, a symbol of the beginning of her own remarkably long and successful marriage to Prince Philip, it is as if she were passing the baton of her own good fortune to Charles and Diana. It breaks my heart a little to think that, despite the sincere, loving wishes the Queen surely poured into that beautiful pink diamond, it simply could not bring them the happily ever after she had hoped for. If you enjoy historic jewelry like this, I've added a link in the description to Laurel Antique Jewelry, where you can explore genuine Victorian and Edwardian pieces from the same era as many royal treasures. The romance of the pink diamond did not end in the 80s. As the decades rolled on, this beautiful jonquil flower waited for another joyful family milestone. In June 1999, the Queen selected it once again, this time for the wedding of her youngest son, Prince Edward, to Sophie Rhys-Jones. This wedding felt remarkably different from the grand, global spectacle we saw in 1981. Edward and Sophie intentionally stepped away from massive royal pomp, requesting a more relaxed, family-focused celebration at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. But the pink diamond was not the only nod to the Queen's own bridal history that day. To complement the sparkling floral brooch, she reached for the Queen Anne and Queen Caroline pearl necklaces. These are actually two distinct historic pieces, usually worn together as a double strand. The shorter necklace of 46 pearls belonged to Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch, while the longer strand of 50 pearls belonged to Queen Caroline, the wife of King George II. Their real magic for this specific day, however, lies in 1947. These pearls were a wedding gift to the Queen from her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, and they are the very pearls she wore to walk down the aisle. By choosing to wear both her wedding diamond and her wedding pearls to welcome Sophie into the fold, the Queen was offering the highest, most heartfelt, silent blessing. She was literally draping herself in the memories of her own happy beginnings. I have to admit, I personally have a great deal of affection for Edward and Sophie. Looking back, it is so lovely to see how their quiet, enduring, and deeply happy marriage has perfectly mirrored the timeless sparkle of the Queen's bridal treasures. While the pink diamond and historic pearls spoke of the Queen's personal marital happiness, another motif in her vault carried a more universal symbol of romance. Let us step back to May 1960, a deeply emotional day for the royal family. Princess Margaret was marrying Anthony Armstrong Jones at Westminster Abbey. To truly understand the atmosphere of this day, we have to remember the heartbreak that preceded it. Years earlier, Margaret had endured a painful public separation from Group Captain Peter Townsend. Because he was a divorced man, the Queen, as head of the Church of England, effectively could not give her consent to their marriage. So, when Margaret finally found someone she wanted to build a family with, the Queen was genuinely thrilled for her sister. For the ceremony, the Queen wore a stunning turquoise silk taffeta and tulle ensemble designed by Norman Hartnell, the same couturier who had crafted both her own and Margaret's wedding dresses. Pinned to her vibrant blue-green bodice was Queen Mary's lover's knot brooch. Queen Mary had acquired this imposing piece from Gerard in 1932. It is a substantial silver and gold bow set with brilliant cut diamonds, tied in a traditional lover's knot. Gerard's master jewelers set the lower ribbons of this bow on hinges, so with the slightest movement of the Queen or a gentle breeze, the diamonds would literally come alive and shimmer. It was a day filled with fresh, modern energy. Margaret looked absolutely breathtaking, walking down the aisle in her magnificent Poltimore tiara, marrying a photographer who brought a decidedly creative, contemporary spirit into the royal family. For the Queen, who had watched her sister struggle through such profound heartbreak years before, this was a moment of pure, heartfelt celebration. By choosing the lover's knot, she offered a deeply feminine, profoundly romantic gesture of support to a sister who had fought so hard for her own happy ending. While the Queen enjoyed wearing this beautiful brooch on countless occasions throughout her long reign, Margaret's big day would not be the only time she chose this sparkling symbol of romance to celebrate a family marriage. Half a century later, the lover's knot would be called upon for another union that captured the world's heart. Fast forward to April 2011. Once again, the bells of Westminster Abbey were ringing, this time for Prince William and Catherine Middleton. The atmosphere here felt entirely different from the anxious, high-stakes royal weddings of the past. Catherine was 29, had dated William for years, and was well accustomed to the relentless gaze of the press. Observers noted that the Queen seemed particularly satisfied and at ease, perhaps seeing in Catherine a quiet strength that could withstand the pressures of royal life. Reflecting this sunny optimism, the Queen arrived in a cheerful primrose yellow double crepe wool dress and coat by her personal stylist, Angela Kelly. She wore her signature three-strand pearl necklace, and there, sparkling against the yellow fabric, was the lover's knot brooch once again. She even loaned Catherine the delicate Cartier halo tiara, a piece given to her by her parents on her 18th birthday, signaling her complete acceptance of the new bride. When you think about the name and design of this specific jewel, it really is the ultimate royal wedding accessory. A lover's knot traditionally represents an unbreakable bond and true devotion. Choosing to wear it is such a beautiful, silent way for a monarch to wish the couple well and express her wholehearted approval of their union. I also find it rather touching to look at the timeline here. When she wore this sparkling bow for Princess Margaret's wedding in 1960, Elizabeth was still a young queen, only a few years into her reign. By the time William married in 2011, she had spent nearly 6 decades on the throne. Yet for this joyful family moment, she once again chose the lover's knot brooch, a jewel whose design is associated with love and devotion. There is something rather lovely about the idea that, even after all those years of duty and experience, she still reached for such a quietly romantic piece. In November 1973, the world watched as the Queen's only daughter, Princess Anne, married Captain Mark Phillips at Westminster Abbey. The couple had met 5 years earlier through their shared passion for horses. While Mark was a commoner, he was a highly respected Olympic athlete, and the Queen fully supported this union based on their shared interests. With around 500 million viewers tuning in globally, the pressure of the day was immense, but the royal family masterfully used their jewels to project a sense of steadfast tradition. Princess Anne walked down the aisle wearing Queen Mary's fringe tiara, the exact same diamond fringe the Queen herself had worn on her own wedding day in 1947. To complement her daughter's powerful tribute, the Queen reached into her vault and selected the Dorset bow brooch. This wonderfully elaborate diamond bow, set in gold and silver, was crafted by Carrington. Its history is, quite literally, a tale of 3 weddings. It began in 1893 as a wedding gift from the County of Dorset to Princess Mary of Teck, the future Queen Mary. Decades later, in 1947, she passed it down to Princess Elizabeth as a wedding present. At the time, the 1973 wedding looked like a flawless fairy tale, full of glitter and public adoration, though we now know their private life would eventually become complicated, leading to a divorce in 1992. The Dorset bow was a beautifully safe, historic, and classic choice for a young bride's first marriage. But when Princess Anne married for the second time nearly 20 years later, the Queen reached for a completely different jewel from her collection. And unlike the reassuringly traditional Dorset bow, this brooch carried a rather unexpected story behind it. Now we step back briefly into an Edwardian family scandal that nearly scattered some of the royal family's most important jewels. Queen Mary's charming but reckless brother, Prince Francis of Teck, shocked his family upon his early death in 1910 by leaving his most precious jewels to his married mistress. Among them were the famous Cambridge emeralds and a magnificent pearl and diamond piece known as the Emperor of Austria brooch. For Queen Mary, this was unacceptable. She quietly bought the emeralds back for £10,000, while the brooch eventually returned to the royal vault years later. Safe at last, these recovered treasures were destined to make striking appearances at family weddings. In April 1963, the Queen attended the wedding of her first cousin, Princess Alexandra of Kent, to Angus Ogilvy. The ceremony at Westminster Abbey was a grand royal occasion, watched by around 200 million viewers worldwide, and followed by a glittering ball at Windsor Castle for 2,000 guests. For this joyful family celebration, the Queen chose a soft pale blue coat. Pinned against the gentle spring color was the Emperor of Austria brooch. I've thought that this was a rather lovely choice for Alexandra's wedding. The brooch itself was closely connected to the Teck family and to Queen Mary, the grandmother both Elizabeth and Alexandra shared. There is something quietly fitting about the moment. At the wedding of Queen Mary's granddaughter, Elizabeth appeared wearing a jewel whose story was also tied to that same branch of the family. In December 1992, Princess Anne married for the second time, exchanging vows with Sir Timothy Lawrence. Because she was divorced, and the Church of England was still highly reluctant to remarry divorced individuals at the time, the ceremony could not take place in England. Instead, it was held at the small and rather quiet Crathy Kirk near Balmoral Castle in Scotland. There were no grand carriages and no thousands of spectators lining the streets, just a small gathering of family and close friends. The Queen and Prince Philip were both present, standing beside their daughter on this more private, deeply personal occasion. That day, the Queen wore a turquoise green coat, and pinned against it was the Cambridge Emerald Cluster brooch. The vivid green of the emeralds caught the light beautifully against the fabric, creating a look that felt both elegant and quietly striking, perfectly suited to a wedding that was far more intimate than the great royal ceremonies the world was used to watching. We step into a very different chapter of royal history. May 2018, the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Outwardly, the day looked like a flawless modern celebration, but behind the scenes, the weeks leading up to it were filled with dramatic headlines, press leaks, and intense public scrutiny. The Queen, ever the ultimate diplomat, wanted the day to be a success, but she was certainly navigating uncharted waters with a new generation. Arriving at St. George's Chapel in a vivid lime green ensemble, she reached into her vault for the Richmond brooch. What exactly is this piece? It is a magnificent slice of family history, given to Princess Mary of Teck in 1893 as a wedding present from the town of Richmond, where her family had lived for years at White Lodge. It is a large, imposing diamond scroll design that typically features a detachable, pear-shaped pearl drop. On this particular day, however, the Queen chose to wear it in its slightly more tailored form, without the pearl. When you look at the occasions where the Queen usually wore this specific jewel, a very interesting pattern emerges. The Richmond brooch is one of the largest and most heavyweight pieces in her personal collection. She frequently reserved it for deeply solemn, significant state occasions, such as the annual Festival of Remembrance. It is a piece that breathes duty and resilience. So much so that just a few years later, this would be the exact same brooch she wore while sitting alone at St. George's Chapel for the funeral of her beloved husband, Prince Philip. Knowing this, I can't help but reflect on her choice for the wedding. It feels far from accidental. This was clearly not a soft romantic selection like the Lover's Knot or the Williamson pink diamond. Perhaps, sensing the tension and the intense modern scrutiny surrounding the day, the Queen wanted to emphasize the sheer status and gravity of the monarchy. These kinds of historic, imposing jewels can often act as a soft, symbolic gesture. To me, it felt almost like a quiet signal to Harry and Meghan, a gentle but firm reminder that, amidst all the modern glamour, they were stepping into an ancient, heavy system. What happens when the Queen needed to project approval while carefully navigating a highly delicate family situation? April 2005 brought one of the most complex events of the Queen's entire reign, the marriage of Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. The Queen's position was incredibly delicate. Recognizing her son's happiness was essential, she orchestrated a masterclass in royal compromise. As Supreme Governor of the Church of England, she did not attend their civil ceremony at the Windsor Guildhall. Instead, she and Prince Philip only attended the religious blessing that followed, later hosting the reception at Windsor Castle. But what do you wear to the blessing of your son's highly scrutinized second marriage? the Queen chose the Australian wattle brooch. This is a magnificent, highly valuable piece. It was presented to the Queen as a state gift from the government and people of Australia during her landmark 1954 Commonwealth tour. Designed by Paul Schneller and commissioned from William Drummond & Co. of Melbourne, it features yellow brilliants forming the golden wattle flower, white brilliants for tea tree blossom, and blue-white baguettes for mimosa. It is spectacular. At the 2005 blessing ceremony, the Queen appeared with this large diamond and wattle motif sparkling on her coat. While it had been in her collection for decades, it was, at its core, a state gift. At most other royal weddings, the Queen frequently reached for antique family heirlooms steeped in romantic or maternal sentiment. Here, she opted for something undeniably beautiful and highly valuable, yet perhaps a bit more neutral. Of course, we know that over the years, the Queen's relationship with Camilla evolved into one of deep, genuine respect, eventually culminating in her public wish for Camilla to be known as Queen Consort. But looking back at 2005, the choice of the Australian wattle brooch feels like a subtle reflection of the cautious, unique atmosphere of that very delicate new chapter. Our next wedding brings us to a rather unexpected stylistic choice. In July 1986, the Queen's second son, Prince Andrew, married Sarah Ferguson in a grand, highly celebrated ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Andrew was widely known to be a favorite of the Queen, and she was visibly delighted by this union. The couple was young, energetic, and immensely popular with the public. To show her support, the Queen even broke with convention by commissioning a brand new diamond tiara from Gerard, the York tiara, as a personal wedding gift for Sarah. The monarchy was heavily invested in this marriage, hoping for a modern, joyful success story. For the televised ceremony, the Queen wore a beautiful, vibrant blue pleated outfit. But surprisingly, she was not wearing a brooch that day. Instead, she opted to let her pearls do all the talking. You might actually recognize the necklace. It is the exact same historic double strand of Hanoverian pearls that she wore to Prince Charles and Princess Diana's wedding just 5 years earlier. But rather than pinning on a traditional brooch, the Queen used a very clever styling trick. She intentionally shifted the necklace so that its dazzling oval diamond cluster clasp, which may have originated from a ring belonging to Queen Charlotte, rested elegantly at the side of her neckline, just below her collarbone. By wearing the necklace asymmetrically, this brilliant diamond clasp served the exact same visual purpose as a brooch. To complete the look, she wore exquisite pearl drop earrings from Queen Alexandra's wedding parure. While the jewelry was undeniably historic, my absolute favorite detail from that day has nothing to do with diamonds or pearls. It is a fleeting, charming moment caught on camera after the ceremony. As the newlyweds' 1902 state landau carriage began to roll away, little Prince William playfully started running after it. Suddenly, the Queen, completely forgetting protocol, broke into a sprint. She ran after her young grandson, grabbing his hand to guide him safely away from the carriage wheels. It was such a sweet, unguarded moment, reminding us that beneath the heavy mantle of the monarchy, she was also a deeply protective, loving grandmother. The twilight years of the Queen's reign offered choices that spoke of a quiet, settled contentment. July 2020 brought the most unusual royal wedding of the last century. Princess Beatrice married Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi. Originally planned for May at St. James's Palace with a grand reception, the COVID-19 pandemic shattered those plans. Compounding the stress was the intense public scandal surrounding Beatrice's father, Prince Andrew. Beatrice was going through an incredibly difficult time in the public eye. In a totally uncharacteristic move for the modern royal family, the wedding was held in absolute secrecy at the Royal Chapel of All Saints in Windsor Great Park. Only about 20 guests attended, but among them, standing at a safe social distance, were the Queen and Prince Philip. For this secret, deeply intimate ceremony, the Queen wore a beautiful aquamarine outfit and pinned to it the Rose of England brooch. This delicate piece, designed as a pair of wild roses in warm-toned gold and set with diamonds, was a gift from the Sultan of Oman for her Diamond Jubilee in 2012. It represents the national emblem of England, But the real story here wasn't just the brooch. It was the entire visual ensemble. The Queen allowed Beatrice to wear her own Norman Hartnell gown from the 1960s, and most significantly, she loaned her the Queen Mary diamond fringe tiara, the exact tiara the Queen herself wore on her wedding day in 1947. By showing up to this tiny secret wedding, loaning her most sentimental bridal tiara, and wearing a beautiful, sparkling English rose, the Queen was wrapping her granddaughter in a protective embrace. It was her way of saying to the world, despite the scandals surrounding her father, and despite the pandemic, this bride has my absolute, unwavering support. In October 2018, Princess Eugenie married Jack Brooksbank at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. For the Queen, who had weathered so many high-profile family divorces, this union must have been a breath of fresh air. Eugenie and Jack had been together for 7 calm, completely non-dramatic years before their engagement. When the engagement was finalized, Eugenie proudly shared that Granny was one of the very first people to know. Arriving at the chapel alongside Prince Philip, the Queen looked wonderfully vibrant in a pale turquoise coat and matching hat. Around her neck was her familiar 3-strand pearl necklace, and pinned against the turquoise fabric was one of the most unabashedly romantic pieces she owned, the Cullinan V brooch. The centerpiece of this delicate platinum web is an 18.8-carat heart-shaped diamond. It was cut from the legendary Cullinan, the largest gem-quality rough diamond ever discovered, weighing an astonishing 3,106 carats when it was found in South Africa in 1905. The stone was later presented to King Edward VII, and this graceful heart-shaped fragment eventually became part of a magnificent stomacher created for Queen Mary to wear at the Delhi Durbar in 1911. But the Queen's brilliant use of family treasures that day was not limited to her own outfit. She loaned Eugenie the Greville Emerald Kokoshnik tiara. Created by Boucheron in 1919, this distinct, powerful piece features a massive central emerald and a striking aristocratic aura. It had never been used as a wedding tiara before. By loaning such a rare and formidable jewel, the Queen gently but undeniably elevated the status of her granddaughter's wedding, showing absolute, unwavering support. As for her own heart-shaped Cullinan V, the Queen clearly cherished what it represented. She had previously chosen it to celebrate her own golden wedding anniversary, making it a deeply personal symbol of successful, enduring love. Choosing this beloved, sentimental heart for Eugenie's autumn wedding feels like the most perfect, gentle finale to our story of the Queen's wedding brooches. I truly hope this journey through royal history has brought you some comfort and warmth today. In a world that often feels so fast-paced and uncertain, I love that we can share this quiet space together, revisiting these beautiful, timeless stories, and perhaps learning something new along the way. I would absolutely love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these royal weddings do you still remember vividly? And what do you think about the Queen's silent, sparkling messages? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring these beautiful histories together. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me today. I will see you in the next video.